So I recently moved some speakers around in my studio, and I've had some questions about Atmos calibration. So I thought this would be a good chance to talk about it. I shot a little bit of video as I was recalibrating my setup. So let's talk about Atmos studio calibration. First off, something I should mention is all the calibration in my studio right now, I did it myself. Just to give you a little bit of context for that, I've been tuning studios and like large format PAs for a long time. So measuring and aligning and calibrating, tuning, optimizing, whatever terminology you want to use, it's something I've been doing for quite a while. And putting the Atmos stuff together, to me, it's a lot simpler than some of the PAs that I've had to work on and get working. So that's why I kind of opted to do it myself. I am currently going back and forth with Dolby because I would like to have them come in and verify the space at some point. But in the meantime, I've just been working on it as I got it set up, and it's been sounding ridiculous in here. So, but anyways, I just want to give you that context. Haven't had Dolby in here, so take it all with a grain of salt. So as I mentioned, I recently moved some speakers around in my studio. I'm going to show you one of the big things I'm trying to do in here today is I'm repositioning my rear speakers. And let me show you what I mean. So you can kind of see the blue tape. That was where the rear stand was. And I'm trying to get another, I don't know, it's going to be about another foot, trying to just get them moved back. So I'm just kind of roughing it in right now. And in a little bit, I will get my measurement software out and I'm going to put these right in position and phase align them. But first, I have to, like, this whole back corner here is going to end up getting redone because this rack was actually forward, which was part of why the position was compromised in the first place. So I'm just trying to kind of fix a bunch of things, improve on a bunch of things now. All the angles on my placement has been correct from the beginning. Dolby has a document, the Dolby Atmos Home Entertainment Studio Technical Guidelines. They've got a little chart. It shows you what all the angles are. And there's actually a fair amount of wiggle room, in my opinion, on placement. I mean, you've got a 20-degree range for where the side speakers can go, and then there's a 20-degree range on where the rear speakers could go. And because of the way my room was set up, where I had some furniture, where I had my big ISO rack for my computer and stuff in it, I had brought my rear speakers a little closer to me than maybe was optimal. And for me, sitting in the mix position, it was fine because I'm just sitting in that sweet spot. The angles are correct. Everything is aligned electronically for time, so it doesn't affect the arrival at my ears. But the problem I felt like I was running into was, now that I've got more people coming in to check out the space and to experience Atmos for the first time, a lot of the people coming in don't understand, hey, you have to sit right in the sweet spot. I had a very small sweet spot because of placement of the speakers. I just didn't want people to have to worry about that kind of thing as much. So I pushed my rear speakers back a little bit. I moved some furniture around in here so I can do it. I think I moved the angle out. It's a little bit wider. And the reason I can tell that is because the rears don't quite line up with my height speakers and the height channels, and the rears, theoretically, if you're doing everything at 45 degrees for the height channels, the rear speakers should drop right underneath those, and mine are a little bit wider just looking at them in here. But they're all still within Dolby spec according to the document. So anyways, I pushed them back and I thought, let's talk about calibration. When it comes to calibration of any kind of speaker system, whether it's studio monitors or large format PA, for Atmos, stereo, whatever it is, there's essentially three components to the whole thing, getting it all optimized, calibrated, tuned, whatever terminology you want to call it. The first thing for me is frequency response. I want the frequency response of every speaker to basically be matched so that it's the same stuff coming out of each speaker, regardless of which speaker it is. This is important in the Atmos setups because a lot of us have mixed speakers in our setups. So for me, I have different height speakers than I do with the ear levels. Some people have different speakers up front than they do for their surrounds and their rears and the height. So with all of these speakers being slightly different sometimes, hopefully in the same family, but with any of that difference, it's important to have the frequency response of each of those speakers be matched as close as possible. The next important part of calibration is level. I want the same level of sound coming out of each speaker. So I don't want like my left front to be louder than my right rear or my left rear speaker. The heights should all be at the same level as the fronts and the sides. So everything needs to be calibrated to output the same level. And the final component of calibration is time. I need every speaker in an Atmos setup, it all needs to arrive at the mix position at the same time. Now, in practice, in a bigger room, you're not going to have everything landing at the same time everywhere, but you still have to have kind of a focal point somewhere in the room where everything is going to arrive at the same time. Let's talk about software for calibrating things. I use a piece of software for most of the calibration called Smaart, and I've been using this for, gee whiz, it's probably been almost 20 years now because I use Smaart for the live sound work that I do. And it's kind of the industry standard measurement platform for loudspeaker tuning and optimization. So if you're going to put in a big PA, odds are somebody's going to be using Smaart to tune it. There's some other stuff out there that gets used, but Smart's the main one. That's what I use here for my studio, and I think it's what the Dolby guys are using too. I wouldn't recommend just going out and purchasing it. If you're only doing one studio, it is not an inexpensive piece of software. I don't know that it's worth it to just use it for one studio, and it's also not the most intuitive piece of software to use. I've had a lot of training and been mentored by a lot of guys in using it properly over the years. I don't know that I would say go and get Smaart if you're trying to set up Atmos. There's other ways you can measure things out there. When it comes to frequency response, Dolby actually has a recommended curve to use for calibrating your system. I'll be honest, when I first put in my system last year, I was not the biggest fan of their calibration curve. I had a different one that I'd been using on my speakers for a long time. So that's what I started with. At some point late last year, I started trying the Dolby curve, and honestly, I've really been liking the results I've been getting using it. So I kind of want to say, hey, I poo-pooed it for a bit, probably in some forums, and I've actually been liking the results. So, your own mileage may vary with it, but for me, I've been happy with it. Something I should mention about the frequency response curve, the whole purpose of having some kind of frequency response, like a particular measurement curve to your speakers, it's all about translation. And this isn't anything new for us working in a studio environment. For decades, The goal has always been for our mixes to translate to as many systems possible outside of the room. And the curve that Dolby recommends, I mean, it's just basically based on that to help with translation and to help if you go to another Atmos studio so that things all sound the same. What I think it does that we haven't had in studios is it is creating a little more of a standard than probably a lot of us are used to. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing. In the film world, there is a standard that movie theaters are all calibrated to. When we get into home entertainment environments, to me, it's a little more of the Wild West because consumer speakers, they're all different. But the curve that Dolby is recommending, from what I understand, they've done a lot of research and they've talked with a lot of engineers and gone back and forth on things. It's not something that they just kind of made up. There was research on it. You may like it. You may not like it. At the end of the day, you probably don't need to use it. You do need to have all of your speakers matched. You need the frequency response matched, and they've got to be matched to something. But if your mixes translate outside of the room, that's all that matters. I mean, that's the reason why a lot of guys, they're still working on NS10s. The NS10 thing, it wasn't because they sound awesome. It was because when we would mix on them, things would translate. And a lot of times our mixes are the inverse of a frequency response. Really, you should work on speakers that sound a way that you like and that sound a way that helps your work translate outside the studio. Now, when it comes to measuring frequency response of my speakers, I actually didn't do it with Smaart. I used SonarWorks multi-channel version. I could do it with Smaart, but I've used SonarWorks on my studio in here for a long time, back when I was just in stereo, and I always really liked the results. The thing that's nice with the multi-channel version of SonarWorks is you can export your EQ settings to input them into the Matrix Studio. Right now, it's a manual process, but that's what I did. I just kicked out the EQ settings, input them into the Matrix Studio. It took a long time to do because you've got to manually input all of these little filters, but the results have been great. So that's what I did for frequency measurement. That's something that you could do too. The thing I like about having SonarWorks for that is if I change out speakers at some point, if I have to swap something out because something broke or I just want to try something different, I can just remeasure and update it. I don't have to pull out my whole rig. Like the Smaart thing, I've got it's a whole thing. Now let's talk about the time domain and getting everything time aligned. For that, this is where I prefer to use Smaart and to do it myself. To do the time alignment, I use Smaart's dual FFT, and the dual FFT provides a transfer function. And basically what that means is it's a comparison measurement. So it's a comparison between two sources. One of those sources is a reference signal. In this case, I use pink noise. And then the measurement signal is basically the measurement microphone in place. So what I'm doing is I'm comparing the measurement to the reference in the dual FFT. The transfer function gives me a few different pieces of information. One of those is basically amplitude over frequency, where I can see the frequency balance. I can also use that for the overall level calibration, which is what I did. The other thing that's great about the transfer function is it shows me a measurement of phase over time. And phase isn't the easiest thing for me to explain to people, but in terms of what I'm going to use it for, I think it'll make sense. So when I look at the phase trace in Smaart, I'm seeing the relative phase, basically. It's the relative phase of my measurement signal to the reference signal. If they were both exactly the same, we would see a flat phase trace in here, but you can see in the video I shot from it that it's not flat. It changes. And this is different for every speaker. It's going to be different, and it's not something to freak out about because it's not like a completely linear phase thing. I know there are systems out there that do that, and there is a price to doing that, which is a whole other conversation. Doesn't mean it would sound bad though, but in general, every speaker out there is affecting phase. So when I look at it and it's not ruler flat, it doesn't freak me out. What I can use this trace for though is if I get the phase measurement off of one of my speakers, in this case I use my left front speaker, I can take a measurement of that and I can match that phase trace to all of my other speakers. So if all of my other speakers match that, basically it means that all of those other speakers are also arriving at that microphone position at the same time. And it's super accurate to do this, which is why I like to do it. I think it's even more accurate than using a laser. I know a lot of guys will be out there and they've got their fancy lasers to place speakers. I just use the phase trace. And in this case, I got my trace measurement off of my left front, and then I actually physically moved my rear speakers into position. I just moved the stand and really kind of moved them. I got them ballparked with a tape measure to begin with, and then I just pushed them right into place. And you can see that in the video, how that phase trace just kind of locks in. Boom. That's how I time things. A lot of guys, they'll use the impulse response, which is another piece of information that Smaart gives us, but the impulse response, it's really just amplitude and shows us the kind of overall impulse of the room, or the impulse of the speaker, I should say, in the room. It's sort of accurate, but the frequency stuff, I mean, you'd be surprised. You just go a little bit off, quarter of an inch even, or less than that. And even just twisting and turning the angles just a slight amount, all of that affects the arrival time right there. So I just use the phase trace and actually physically move things because it's way more accurate than just using the impulse. And whenever I set up a studio for someone doing it this way, their jaw usually drops when they hear the imaging. So that's why I use the phase trace for all of my time alignment. And I just set the delay time because I had a little bit of delay on my front speakers. I set the delay time to the same time on the rears and got it into place. One thing I should mention, I did use the impulse response in placing my measurement mic. I had to get the measurement mic back in the exact same spot it was in when I did the original calibration. And with the left and right speakers running isolated with my reference signal going into them, I can see the two different impulses from them in Smaart. So I just had them both running and I moved the microphone until I got my impulses aligned and checked the phase on them to make sure it was in the right spot. And then I went ahead and realigned the back speakers. It sounds way more complicated than it actually is. It took me a couple minutes to do. If you don't have a measurement platform that will show you an impulse response or the phase like that, maybe you don't even have a measurement mic, but you're trying to get the timing right, you're just trying to rough it in, maybe you're waiting on the Dolby guys or somebody else to come in and calibrate your system, there are a few different ways you can do it. One way you can do it is get an omnidirectional microphone and put it in your alignment position and get like a you just need an impulse of some sort. You could use like a snare drum or a kick drum, or like a sound effect of a balloon popping, or like a really short burst of pink noise, just something you want that on a track in your DAW. And then what I would do is I would record that impulse, play that through each individual speaker one at a time, and record the result in your DAW. So in the end, you'll have a bunch of different tracks, and you'll have that impulse showing up like the waveform in there. What you can do is you can look at the different arrival times of that waveform on your recorded signals. Take the one that is the furthest away, and then you want to delay each other arrival, or each other speaker in this case, so that they are in time with that latest arrival. Otherwise, you have to get out and you're going to have to physically move speakers. And really, in my opinion, the best solution is always to get a speaker in the right physical place, but it's not always possible. And when you can't do that, like my height speakers, if you watched the video I think I did on the tour, those are not moving. I am not going to move those. That was a pain. I mean, unless somebody comes in here and says these are way off, and I know they're not because they're 45 degrees over and 45 up. But unless somebody comes over and says, you're off by 15 degrees, which they're not moving. I'm going to just do it with delay. And because my height channels are higher up here than my ear level channels are to me, I have to delay all of my ear level speakers so that they are in time with the height channels. I know it sounds complicated. Maybe it is the first few times you do it, and that's okay. But I'm used to time aligning like lots of PA speakers and fills and all kinds of crazy things that shouldn't work sometimes. So getting, 7 ear level speakers and 4 height channels to all arrive at the same time at one spot, that was a little simpler to me than some of the projects I've done over my career. So the last thing to check for calibration is level. This is something that I do it kind of in the beginning when everything's set up and getting all the frequency response stuff together, but it's something I want to check at the end because moving speakers around, that will affect level. And in this case, since I was physically moving my rear speakers, I didn't think the level would change much. I mean, it wasn't much, but since I moved them a foot back, pretty much, maybe even a foot and a half back from where they were, I knew that would affect the level a little bit. I wanted to get them in the final position before I check the level, but I do this with Smaart. I just look at the frequency response in the dual FFT and just match it to my original reference off of my front left. Real easy. If you don't have Smaart, you can do this with just an SPL meter. Dolby recommends calibrating the level of your speakers at 85 dB, although I have started to see them recommend 79. The latest version of I'm not going to be able to pronounce it. The spreadsheet, the DART, there's a D in there. Maybe the D is silent. But if you look in the spreadsheet, last time I plugged stuff in for my room, it actually said 79. And I can't remember if that was in there or if I changed it, but I'm calibrated at 79 dB C-weighted SPL. There's a big difference between C-weighted SPL measurements and A-weighted measurements, and every recommendation you see for studio stuff is typically in a C-weighted measurement, but C-weighted is what they recommend. So the recommendation for Atmos is 85 dB C-weighted. If you look at the ATSC, and that's TV World, basically, ATSC's recommendation for a room of the size I'm in right now, and it's based on the cubic feet, like the volume of air, their recommendation is 79. My room is at 79. 85, I guess it depends on the music, but 85 it's just too loud in a near field situation, in my opinion, and my speakers are definitely a near field setup. A lot of Atmos rooms are set up more midfield and maybe even far field, but in a near field situation, I like 79. Dolby says 85. Still, that's their recommendation. I bet we'll start seeing that change a little bit over time, but maybe not, because Dolby's they've been recommending 85 for surround setups too. So 85 might be the way to go. But to measure that, you need some kind of an SPL meter. I have an old, let me grab it. I have an old Radio Shack. These were standards for a long time. You probably find one on eBay, although there are better options out there for SPL meters. You could use that. Most of the time these days, I just use an app on my smartphone. I've checked those against calibrated measurement mics, and it's close enough for rock and roll. I mean, you're probably going to be fractions of a dB off from what it really is, and it's probably not gonna hurt you that much to use. The Atmos renderer will output pink noise so that you can do this kind of calibration. Just go one speaker at a time out of the renderer, get all your speakers to 79, then you can turn on your sub or the LFE channel and set that 10 dB higher at 89, and most of the time you're going to be in the ballpark enough to do it. When I check level, I do it in Smaart because Smart's going to give me a little more information. I did use just the SPL in my phone to kind of get the baseline level for one of them, and then just matched everything in Smaart. So I hope that gives you some information on calibration. It's just how I've done it. The Dolby guys, I know they've got a different method of doing things, and they set up a bunch of mics and do averaging and do things. I have not worked with them. I hope to do it at some day because I'd love to learn their method, but that's just what I did. It's what works for me. My room sounds killer. Your mileage may vary. So if you got questions about Atmos, questions about stuff I do, you can leave a comment. Contact me at my website, staglproductions.com. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.